next up we have Laura McGarrigle going directly to the issue of the Centre for Research and Remembrance, which is a huge issue. It's the reason that we're here this afternoon, to look at that, what's going to happen with it. We do need more information about what's going on. There is a steering committee that we know about, and Laura will tell us more about that, I'm sure. But we're very glad and grateful to have you, Laura. Laura is the Assistant Secretary in charge of Adoption, Mother and Baby Homes and Research in the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Truth, which is the lead government department overseeing the Centre for Research and Remembrance. So she's the senior civil servant in charge of all of this, and we're very, very glad to have you here today. Will you step up, please, Laura?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to begin with a note of thanks and a note of caution. So firstly, my sincere thanks to Catriona and to the Royal Irish Academy for the kind invitation to attend today's event in these beautiful surroundings, and for the opportunity to share some thoughts on the work we're doing on the National Centre for Research and Remembrance. Secondly, my note of caution, or my disclaimer, if you will. I'm deeply conscious that I'm in a room filled with incredible experience and expertise, including people with lived experience and people who've dedicated their lives to some of the issues that I will be touching on in my presentation this afternoon. And I'm equally deeply conscious of my relative lack of knowledge and expertise. So I apologise in advance if I don't have all the technical detail or know-how that you may wish to have answers to, and certainly if we don't have all those answers at this point in time. I'm also very conscious of the sensitivity of language and have tried to use inclusive and compassionate terminology, but mindful that there are diverse viewpoints on certain terms. So in terms of what I hope to cover in the presentation today, I'll begin by looking briefly at the background and the context for the whole of government initiative that is the National Centre for Research and Remembrance. Then I'll give you an overview of the initiative itself before looking more in depth at two specific work streams, the archives and the legal and legislative work streams. I'll then look briefly at some of the other work underway, which is foundational in terms of the archival aspects of the National Centre, specifically the work enabled by the Birth Information and Tracing Act and the management of the Mother and Baby Homes Commissions of Investigation Archive. And then I'll just conclude by briefly looking ahead at our commitment to future consultation and co-creation as we advance the National Centre initiative. So the background to the initiative is, of course, the tragic legacy of institutional abuse, and in particular the three major inquiries which examined experiences in different institutional settings, and each of which made recommendations related to a national memorial. The first of these was the report of the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse, the Ryan Report, published on the 20th of May 2009, and its first recommendation was a memorial should be erected. The second was, of course, the McAleese report, followed by the Magdalene Commission report, or the Quirke report, in June 2013. And recommendation 6 by Justice Quirke references the acquisition, maintenance and administration of any garden, museum or other form of memorial. And then more than a decade on from the Ryan report, the report of the Commission of Investigation on Mother and Baby Homes, published on the 12th of January 2021, also references in its recommendations a national memorial in line with the views of former residents. And there was also, of course, the report of the Collaborative Forum of Residents of Mother and Baby Homes, whose recommendations were published in 2019 and included a recommendation on a national monument to commemorate, respect and honour mothers and children held in these institutions, and also a recommendation on a living memorial of mother and child institutions, which could be in digital, audio or visual presentation of information and individual narratives. In considering the background to the National Centre, I think it's also essential to recognise the relationship between apology, acknowledgement and memorialisation. So on this slide, I wanted to include the recommendation from the Commission into Child Abuse that the following words should be inscribed as a permanent public acknowledgement of the experiences of the children that suffered so cruelly. And it says, on behalf of the state and of all the citizens of the state, the government wishes to make a sincere and long overdue apology to the victims of childhood abuse for our collective failure to intervene, to detect their pain, to come to their rescue. I've also included a small excerpt from the Taoiseach's apology in 2021, because in this apology it underlines very much that memorialisation must begin with and be grounded in apology, and also that one element of apology is memorialisation, is official acknowledgement of these events and experiences as part of our national history. So within the apology, our Taoiseach said, to confront the dark and shameful reality which is detailed in this report, we must acknowledge it as part of our national history. Recognition begins with this apology and will be followed by commitments to national and local memorialisation and commemoration. The views and wishes of former residents will be paramount, and all commemoration will be led by them. We're very aware that this is what the National Centre must do. Recognise what happened as part of our national story, as preserved and presented by our national cultural institutions, the National Archives of Ireland and the National Museum of Ireland, and it must represent a concrete commitment to non-recurrence. So, responding to the various recommendations for a national memorial, the specific commitment to the National Centre for Research and Remembrance is set out in the Action Plan for Survivors and Former Residents of Mother and Baby and County Home Institutions. Apologies for the long title there. The Action Plan, which was approved and published by Government in November 2021. The plan contains 22 commitments under 8 themes, which you'll see listed on the slide, and you'll notice that there is a strong focus on access to information, archives, education, research, and memorialisation. The wording of the specific actions on the National Centre state that we will develop an All-Ireland memorial in consultation with former residents and other key stakeholders, and just acknowledging the reference there to All Ireland and the importance of the opportunity there that we can engage with survivors who may be north and south and who may have had experiences that traversed both. And we're delighted to be sharing a platform today with colleagues from Northern Ireland in terms of speaking about these important issues. The wording of the actions also state that government will work to establish, on a formal national basis, a national memorial and record centre related to institutional trauma during the 20th century. This will build on the commitment to a central repository of institutional records and will include archiving relevant records and witness testimony by victims and survivors, as well as presenting the historical and social context. It will be developed at a suitable site and operated in accordance with the highest international standards. And then I just wanted to highlight that the commitment to the National Centre for Research and Remembrance is also complemented by several other actions. It's just worth being aware of them and all the work that is going on in relation to each one, because they do feed into the body of work that is required to get to that big vision of the National Centre. And I'll come back briefly to a few of them later in the presentation. More information on all of the actions is also available in the second annual implementation report on the action plan, which, as Maeve mentioned, our Minister published just yesterday. So in terms of the vision for the National Centre, in March 22, Government approved high-level proposals for a National Centre for Research and Remembrance to be located on the site of the former Magdalene Laundry on Sean McDermott St in Dublin 1. The centre will stand as a site of conscience to honour equally all those who spent time in industrial schools, Magdalene Laundries, mother and baby and county home institutions, reformatories and related institutions. The broader National Centre campus will make a valuable contribution to the social and economic development of Dublin's northeast inner city through the provision of social housing units, further and higher educational facilities, and facilities for family and parenting supports. So the National Centre campus will, by design, be both retrospective and forward-facing. It will both recognise the disadvantage experienced by vulnerable women and children in the past, and it will represent an active commitment to tackling disadvantage in the present day. It will stand as apology and as commitment to non-recurrence. It will be part of our national institutions of significant scale and will comprise a museum and exhibition space, the development of which will be led by the National Museum of Ireland in collaboration with survivors, a research centre and repository of records related to institutional trauma in the 20th century, which will form part of the National Archives and which will house an estimated 7 million records, and a garden space for reflection and remembrance. As I mentioned, the intention is that this puts the reality of what happened to some of the most vulnerable in our society at the heart of our national story. So work on the development of the museum is being led by the National Museum of Ireland. Work on the Research Centre is being led by the National Archives, while the overall construction of the National Centre is being led by the Chief State Architect for Ireland. And while physically situated in Dublin, elements of the National Centre will be accessible in other parts of Ireland and abroad, both through the provision of digital access and because it's envisaged that physical presences will be developed elsewhere, including in conjunction with local museums, to enable survivors to visit more easily and to have strong access. So the intention is that the National Centre, while located in Dublin, will achieve a global and a national reach, as well as having strong connections to the local community in the northeast inner city. And this is the master plan that was approved by government and published last July for the National Centre campus. So you will see in the cream-coloured element on the plan, that is the archive and museum space that will be developed both within the historic and convent and chapel buildings and newly developed archive and museum space that will be developed adjacent to the historic buildings and encompassing, as you can see in the green rectangle there, a garden space for reflection and remembrance. The element in the pink is purpose-built facilities for further and higher education. The elements in the orangey colours, see there, will be parenting and family supports. And then over in blue, that will be 25 units of universal social design housing. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the National Centre, the main National Centre buildings there in the cream, housing the museum and archive, will be over 4 floors, 3 floors overground in line with the existing convent and chapel, as well as a basement repository. So it will be significant in scale. As Catriona had mentioned, work is underway on the planning and development stages of the National Centre, and it's been driven by a steering group chaired by the former Secretary-General to the Government and the current Ambassador of Ireland to Great Britain, Mr. Martin Fraser. While still, and sorry, I've listed on the slide, membership of the steering group. There's an awful lot of different state bodies involved, and we're delighted that the Special Advocate for Survivors is on the steering group as well. While still in the early planning stages, there are a number of major work streams. There's a construction work stream comprising multiple project groups and teams operating under the Capital Works Management Framework. And then there are the 3 other work streams that I will delve into right now. So, first of all, the archives work stream. The overall role of this work stream is to provide strategic direction and guidance to the steering group on issues relating to the archival development that's envisaged and to drive practical progress on the archiving of records. The National Archives is leading the work and it's engaging with a large range of bodies as it does so, again, as you'll see listed there on the slide. It's conducted a scoping exercise with departments, agencies and local authorities, and this has identified the scale and classes of relevant records in the possession of each of these bodies, which, as I mentioned, is significant and is estimated to be at between 5 and 7 million in paper-borne digital and digitised formats. A dynamic project plan, which includes an individualised plan for each department or agency, has been developed. Additional archivists, digital archivists, conservators and administration staff have been recruited, and archivists are working on site in the departments or agencies to facilitate the preparation of records for transfer to the National Centre, not in necessarily all departments, but certainly partnering with those that are where it makes sense to do so. And digitisation guidance has also been developed to provide practical advice to departments and agencies in relation to the digitisation of records intended for inclusion in the National Centre. The initial emphasis in all of this work is on records that are already over 30 years old and subject to the National Archives Act. Relevant records beyond the scope of that Act will be informed by the legal and legislative work stream that I will speak to in a moment. In terms of records which may be privately held then, so not held by the bodies on that slide, the National Archives have identified organisations and institutions that might hold relevant records. It's written to the bodies responsible for the operation of county homes, mother and baby homes, industrial schools, orphanages and Magdalene Laundries, which may hold relevant files, including of an administrative and operational nature, and has met with many of them and continues to engage with them. It has also established a Trauma in Archives Committee with representatives from religious institutions and the broader archival community, and the intention is that this work will feed into the work of the National Archives in relation to the National Centre. Moving on then to the legal and legislative work stream. So the intention is that the National Centre repository will house the historical records of state oversight of relevant institutions, records relating to children who were nursed out and boarded out, inspection reports of institutions or of nursed out placements. And in addition, it will also house, the intention is, the records of various inquiry archives, including the McAleese Committee, the Mother and Baby Homes Archive, the Commission of Investigation for Mother and Baby Homes, the archive of the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse, and the archive of the Residential Institutions Redress Board, so that ultimately the intention is that it would house these records. It could also house future records, such as, for example, those of the independent office established in Tuam to lead the intervention there. As has been alluded to by previous speakers, when considering the inquiry records in particular, extremely complex issues arise as a result of the different legislative frameworks that governed each inquiry or redress process and the various legal protections that were ingrained in those legislative frameworks. So the role of this work stream is to develop detailed policy and legislative proposals on the future management of records, which will form part of the repository within the National Centre. So those proposals will span the approach to future retention of each class of records, the lawful basis for that, access to records by data subjects, access to records by researchers, and the use of records by the National Centre as part of museum exhibits, published material, or a programme of outreach or education. A mapping exercise is currently underway to document the current legal framework, which applies in respect of each class of records anticipated for inclusion, including in relation to ownership, retention, access, and the requirement to deposit under the National Archives Act where applicable. And that will support the development of detailed policy options and proposals for future retention. It's really, really important in relation to that work that there is really strong engagement and consultation in relation to those draft proposals, with survivor views absolutely central to the work. While supporting access, the wishes and privacy rights of survivors must, of course, be paramount. And testament to the importance and the sensitivity of this work stream, as you'll have seen on the slide, it is being led by Martin Fraser himself. I just want to move on now to say a few words about the Birth Information and Tracing Act. It's significant in its own right, but it's also an important part of the foundation for the Central Repository for Records to be situated in the National Centre. So the legislation was enacted in June 22, and all services under the Act were commenced by the 3rd of October 2022. And broadly speaking, these services relate to access to information for persons affected and for their next of kin, a tracing service to actively reunite relatives, a contact preference register where people can place their information should a family relative come forward, and the safeguarding of records. A primary focus of the legislation when it was being developed was, of course, to try and ensure immediate access to identity information for those who were adopted, nursed out, boarded out, the subject of an illegal birth registration, who had been born in a mother and baby or county home institution, or who otherwise had questions on their origins and identity. And to date, over 12,900 applications for information have been completed under that legislation. But a central element of the Act, which is most relevant to archival preparations for the National Centre, is Part 7 of the Act. So Part 7 of the Act provides for the safeguarding of records. It provides for immediate safeguarding on commencement, which was the 3rd of October 2022, and it also enables the transfer of records to the Adoption Authority of Ireland under a direction of the authority. To achieve the safeguarding of records, the Act introduces the concept of an information source, which is a person, body or organisation who holds relevant records and is obliged to safeguard those records. But Section 46 of the Act places a similar obligation on any other person holding a relevant record. And any record which falls within the definition of relevant record must be safeguarded, and the authority can direct its transfer. That applies whether it is held by an information source or by any other person. Under the legislation, the authority is empowered to enter and inspect a place where it has reasonable grounds to believe relevant records are held for the purposes of safeguarding those records under the legislation. It also allows seizure of records where the AAI believes this to be necessary for preserving or preventing interference with such records. So, to date, the Adoption Authority of Ireland has issued 3 directions to information sources and 3 directions to other persons under Section 48 of the Act, mandating the transfer of records. The bodies to whom it has issued the directions include religious bodies, charities, and statutory bodies such as the HSE. And for example, in the case of the HSE, there has been a really positive body of work very recently, which has resulted in of the order of 1,000 county home records being transferred from the HSE to the AAI, and these are being digitised by the AAI as we speak. More broadly, the AAI is the keeper of over 100,000 files that were created either by itself, by its predecessor bodies, or by associated adoption agencies. And with the commencement of the 22 Birth Information and Tracing Act, it is now subject to the National Archives Act. So while it has always treated records incredibly seriously and taken care of them in a very serious way, it's actually now also further creating a new dedicated archives function. As part of its work, it has had a major digitisation project underway of its 100,000 files dating back to 1877, and the vast majority of its records are now digitised under that project. And it has also completed renovation work on new record storage space, which will allow it to consolidate the storage of its current records and ensure capacity to store new record acquisitions. Now, just very briefly, sorry, because I know I'm coming close to running out of time, I'll just say maybe 1 or 2 points of note in relation to the records that our department holds. So our department, the Department of Children, holds the McAleese Committee records. They had been in the Department of the Taoiseach, as Maeve had referenced, and they're now held by the Department of Children. Secondly, the department holds the archive of the Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Investigation, and it holds the recovered tapes from the confidential committee of the Commission of Investigation. And in anticipation of taking possession of the Commission's archive and having legislated to preserve the personal data in the database and ensure that Too Slow would hold a copy and a copy would be retained in the archive. Within our department in early 2021, a new information management unit was established. This unit leads on the management of the Commission's archive, as well as the management of departmental records more generally. It's headed up by a principal officer with legal and data protection expertise, and it includes an archivist and the department's data protection officer. So we're very lucky to have that new unit in place now for a number of years, which has been key to us being able to make progress. The unit has been cataloguing the Commission records. All of the institutional records relating to individuals' time in institutions have now been catalogued, and the remaining records to be catalogued relate to the administrative records of the Commission. That residual cataloguing is expected to be completed by year end. The unit has also been working on preservation and transfer of the Commission's digital records onto searchable platforms where necessary, and that supports it to efficiently respond, of course, to access requests for information. So access to records for individuals for information held in the Commission's archive is currently under the GDPR and under FOI legislation, with the latter providing a system for access to deceased relatives' records. And to date, there have been over 1,000 subject access releases in relation to records in the archive. There's also been significant work within our department, led by the Information Management Unit, in relation to relevant departmental records transferring from the Department of Health to our department, so that they can be assessed under the cataloguing project that's ongoing under the archives workstream with the National Archives. So it's expected that that cataloguing project, while at an early stage, will provide further information on the scale of personal data that might be in those departmental records, and will support review, certification and transfer to the National Archives of Ireland. Now, just for the final section of my presentation, I just want to very briefly share some key outcomes from our recent consultation on the National Centre and provide a quick snapshot of progress to date and the path ahead for the National Centre. It's really crucial, of course, that the project is informed by all relevant stakeholders as part of the process of its development. There was an initial open consultation which ran from July to September last year. Almost 220 responses were received, and an independent research company analysed the responses and prepared a detailed report. The steering group for the National Centre reviewed the report in detail, and it met to agree some key commitments for the project as it moves forward. They're available to read in the steering group's response document and the video that it produced, and you'll see details on my final slide of the website that contains all of that information. But the strongest message coming through from the responses to the consultation was from survivors and their families, and it was around decision making. And they want, rightly, to be fully involved at every stage of the centre's development and beyond. The steering group recognised the importance of hearing that message and the importance of working in partnership with survivors and former residents. And so its commitments include that the Special Advocate for Survivors has joined the steering group, that there will be ongoing engagement and collaboration with survivors on co-creation of the exhibits in the centre, that survivors will have a central role in the ongoing governance of the centre, and that the National Museum and the National Archives will run in-person events so that interested people can hear about and feedback on the international research and the work they've undertaken to date. The first of the in-person events run by the National Museum and Archives will take place later in the summer, and these sessions will also involve the Special Advocate. And again, my final slide will give you details of the email address that you can apply to if you'd like to register to attend those events. Sorry, I don't know how clear that slide is, but again, all the information is on the website. It just shows the key themes that came up in the consultation and the key commitments that were made by the steering group in response. So those key themes were the need for equal and inclusive memorialisation, an engaging, authentic and professional museum experience, truth, healing and support, the sensitive treatment of records, a calm and reflective garden space. Now, just very quickly to finish up with the timeline to date and the next steps. So the development of the National Centre is naturally multi-annual in nature, and it's currently in its early planning stages. Extensive work is continuing on the development of a detailed project plan, including timelines. So please treat some of what you see here as very indicative and provisional, because as the planning phase progresses, we will be able to become more detailed in our timeline. But you can see that in July 22, Dublin City Council voted to transfer the site to the OPW to allow the National Centre to progress. And since then, the OPW has been on site carrying out essential maintenance works to make the remaining buildings safe to access and to facilitate future works. In July 2023, Government approved the master plan for the National Centre campus, as I showed earlier in my presentation, and they approved a preliminary business case for the main National Centre buildings. And then in March 24, they approved further key project and governance documents for the full campus site.
Laura, we're very
Out of time. I'm so sorry. This is the final slide. Sorry. Just to flag that the next key step in the project is the completion of a planning permission application, which we hope will be completed in the coming weeks ahead. And I will finish up there. Thank you very much for listening, and you can see details on the slide.